Welcome to this informational video. This video will aid in a deeper understanding of the philosophy of evolutionary astrology, as well as any evolutionary astrology reading. My name is Linda. I'm an evolutionary astrologer and Taoist body-mind-spirit integrator. Before I go on with this video, I want to issue a disclaimer here and say that the topic of this video and the content therein is not suitable for anyone who is very ungrounded. This is only for people who feel very grounded on the earth plane and who don't have any unresolved spiritual trauma. I wouldn't advise anyone who's going through any type of awakening process to move forward in this video at this time, especially without the help of a spiritual advisor or teacher. If you've never had an EA reading before, this video can give you a better sense if my readings are correct for you or not. If you're watching this after purchasing a reading with myself or another evolutionary astrologer, this video will give you a foundational introduction to the philosophy that governs evolutionary astrology and therefore your reading. Before I get into that philosophy, though, I'd like to say a few words on astrology itself and why I use it to read charts. Through my study of astrology, I've encountered evidence of there being specific natural laws that govern the universe and our existence. I came to the study of astrology as a seeker, someone searching for an objective truth that was provable versus a subjective truth that was based solely on faith. Through my continued experiences of having a birth chart accurately describe its owner, through my astrology practice, my belief in astrology was reinforced and I decided to make it my profession. I suppose each evolutionary astrologer reads charts for different reasons. My readings focus on the alleviation of client suffering and karma for the purpose of liberation and enlightenment. Maybe you are wondering how astrology can alleviate suffering or contribute to the awakening of our species as a whole. To answer these and similar questions, I will now dive into the philosophy behind EA. The core teaching of evolutionary astrology centers around duality, or the existence of opposites. These opposites coexist and give rise to each other, and are self-evident in polarities such as light and darkness, growth and decay, summer and winter, male and female. Without the experience of darkness, we would not have the contrast necessary to experience light as its own entity, or something different from darkness. These are the visible aspects of duality and point to the fact that we exist in a dualistic reality. But there are invisible aspects of duality, or opposites, that although we cannot see with our eyes or experience with our other senses, are no less real than those that we can directly observe. It is through the esoteric sciences, one of those being astrology, that we come to knowledge of the invisible proof of duality, and are able to see that nature is nothing more than a mirror for the order that exists in the universe. The duality expressed through nature is a reflection of the duality that exists in the heavens. The human psyche is governed by and mirrors the planets in our solar system. The energies available via the stars and planets of a particular solar system create the scope of experiences available to the beings that reside within that solar system. The human species is deeply connected to the stars and planets, their energies impacting us in major and unseen ways. The different constellations of stars can be thought of as different ingredients at one's disposal when creating a recipe. The chef in this analogy being our soul. The particular sign that was on the horizon at the time of your birth, in conjunction with where the planets were situated, determined what recipe your soul cooked up. Both the planets, constellations, or what's also known as zodiac signs, are comprised of opposing energies, making astrology a system of duality. Your birth chart is a snapshot of time and space, which represents the life and experiences your soul determined would best meet its needs. But getting back to the existence of duality as a natural law, I want to now speak about this law and how things are created in nature. Take the example of how man is created. Is it not through the union of opposites or the different sexes? It is this creation of a new being via the merging of polar opposites that points towards the processes involved in the act of creation. This natural trinity is not considered a sacred number for no reason. Life is sacred, and it is through the merging and integration of complementary opposites that life comes into being. In the birth chart, each planet, asteroid, point, etc., has a polar opposite energy. It is the reading of these opposing energies as they relate to a different part of our being that reveal the being that we will create during our lifetime. That being a different and evolving self-concept or ego identity. In evolutionary astrology, this change and growth in our fundamental self is examined at both the soul and ego levels. In EA, the planet Pluto represents the desires of the native soul. The soul contains within itself two competing and seemingly irreconcilable desires. One of these desires is to separate from its source or place of origin, to polarize and oppose itself in order to create. In separating itself from its source, it creates a separate entity which now has capabilities of self-awareness. The other desire of the soul is to return back to the source from which it came. But this desire to dissolve through merging cannot be fulfilled until the original and competing desire to separate has first been honored and exhausted. This desire to create through separation is fulfilled via the causal body, while the opposing desire to deconstruct and merge is fulfilled via the lower energetic bodies. These bodies being the physical, astral, and mental bodies. It may be strange to hear this at first, as the lower bodies are what seem to separate us from God or Source, while we often consider the soul as somehow more pure or closely connected to God. The reason the lower bodies have a hand in fulfilling the desire to return to Source is connected to the experience of suffering. It is through our physical body and things like illness, our emotional body and things like loss, and our mental body through things such as painful memories and disordered thinking, that we gain direct experience of suffering. It is these three lower bodies that constitute our ego, which is a name given to the self-identity we have that is separate from others and of all creation. It is this perception of being separate from the all, from the ultimate creator and all its creations, that causes us to suffer. Through this perceived separation, fear is born, fear that we are alone, and due to our aloneness, how we will survive. The fear of survival creates fear of change. When we are familiar with certain circumstances, even if these circumstances are ultimately not good for us, we will stay in them versus stepping out into the unknown in hopes of something better. This is how man operates and why there is still so much suffering in the world. This fear of change is due to a lack of awareness of, or belief in, the processes of the soul and the ego I just described, as well as what universal laws these parts of our being actually operate under and are bound by. The natural laws of duality and evolution or change govern the processes of both our soul and ego. I mentioned before that the planet Pluto rules our soul's desires. Thus, by looking at the placement of the planet Pluto in our birth chart, we can see what specific separating desire our soul has been utilizing via its most recent incarnation cycle. This desire, of course, is largely unconscious, as it resides at the level of the causal body, which is outside of egoic awareness. The separating desire is exhausted over countless lifetimes via the experience as a being separate from its origins. The vehicle that allows for the exhaustion of all the possible desires to separate from Source is the ego, or self-identity, which is ruled by the moon. Our current life identity is a product of our past life identity and acts as the creative force that allows for the integration of who we were and currently are into the person we will become via the law of evolution or change. This law of evolution and its related change in ego identity is deeply tied to the law of duality. This is because during each lifetime our ego experiences miniature deaths as we become a different person than who we used to be. The many deaths at the ego level mirror and are preparation for the major death we will experience when our three lower bodies disintegrate. Those bodies again being the physical, mental, and astral or desire/emotional body. The reason I liken our personal evolution to a miniature death has to do with how we change and grow as a person. In each lifetime, we don't become a version of ourselves that is similar to our core identity as a child and younger adult. But as we age, in certain ways, we become the opposite of who we used to be. We grow and evolve through the law of duality and the particular opposing energies we have in our birth chart. What this can look like is someone who is more emotionally stoic and repressed as a child, learning how to become more emotionally in touch with himself and expressive as an adult. Or someone who was more spiritually oriented and intuitive, leaning when they were younger, becoming more agnostic or logic oriented as they age. This change into whatever type of person we initially perceived to be the polar opposite of us has the capacity to create tremendous fear and suffering in our life. It is this journey of becoming the opposite of which we are or were that is seen in the nodes of the moon. Remember, the moon is our ego or self-identity. The south node of the moon is the past life identity we bring forward into the current life, while the north node of the moon reflects the type of person we will eventually become. The moon itself is our current self-concept, which we use to integrate our past and future selves. For this reason, the moon is highly important and is hard at work day in and day out doing the job of weaving what are essentially polar opposite energies or self-concepts into one seamless whole and integrated sense of self, a new self and a new being. As the ego is transformed, be it willingly or unwillingly, the opposing energy of the soul's desire is manifested and experienced. What this means is that changes in our self-identity cause changes to our soul and its desire. That change in our soul's desire being the mechanism for the exhaustion of all separating desires over time via countless incarnations. If we could get a bird's eye view of the evolutionary process, I imagine it would look something like the inside of a watch or other piece of complex machinery, with a multitude of individual parts working in unison to create seamless movement. Looked at another way, the laws that govern the universe are duplicates and layered, reaching down through the heavens to creation, where they are observable through nature, through its cycles and ecosystems. When I read a chart, I begin with Pluto, which tells me the specific desire the soul has been utilizing for the purposes of reincarnating via its most recent cycle of lives. The placement of the other planets in the chart is a reflection of the soul's desire. Everything in the chart, and therefore life of the chart holder, is caused by their soul's desire. For this reason, Pluto is seen as the basis of the chart and life. Next, the moon and its nodes are read in the context of Pluto. The ego identity chosen by the soul will always relate to its desire. Pluto and the nodes make up what is called the evolutionary axis, All the remaining planets in the chart, those planets representing the different parts of the individual, are then read in the context of the evolutionary axis. The evolutionary axis is comprised of two polarity points, Pluto and its polarity point, shown on this slide here, as well as the south node of the moon and its polarity point, called the north node, shown on this slide here. The points in this evolutionary axis show how the soul and ego will evolve, which is through a domino effect. We can imagine the sequence of this evolutionary chain reaction occurring in the following way. The soul's desire is activated. This in turn produces the need for an incarnation to take place, in order that the soul may fully experience itself as separate once again. The energy that comprises the soul is therefore encapsulated into matter and exists inside time and space as an ego, or self, separate from everyone and everything else. In order that the soul may honor its competing need to return back to the source, it is bound by the natural laws that exist within the time and space it now finds itself in. As the ego, created by the soul, experiences the fear and suffering associated with the experience of these two laws of duality and change, the ego and desire nature of the soul are slowly burnt away as the soul learns through its vehicle, the ego, that separation is not all fun and games. The two natural laws of duality and change manage the exhaustion of desire through their different roles. The law of change does not permit the ego to remain the same from lifetime to lifetime, which keeps the soul from staying too long in any one particular desire. The law of duality also aids in the exhaustion of the soul-separating desires through the agent of suffering. Remember that our self-identity will and must change at some point, either in the current life or a future one. This fundamental change in who we know ourselves to be is wrought with fear and pain. It is this experience of becoming our new, different self that is symbolized by the next sequence in the chain reaction we are following. As the ego is metamorphosized, so too is the soul. As the north node is activated and the ego evolves, so too does Pluto and the soul's desire. Since these polarities represent opposite energies, they are on opposite sides of the birth chart. If you locate Pluto in your chart and draw a line directly across, you will find Pluto's polarity point. Similarly, if you find the south node of the moon in the chart, the north node is always directly opposite on the other side. It is these 4 points connected by 2 straight lines that make up the evolutionary axis, shown here, that will show exactly how the soul and ego will grow and change during this and more recent lifetimes. I share this information with you so that as you hear me discuss your own soul's desire and how that relates to your self-identity, you will have some foundation in what your reading is really all about. As an astrologer, I read charts to help people understand why they have had to suffer the things they have, or what they are currently going through. Having the knowledge regarding how and why we must suffer can bring us out of the victim consciousness and resistance surrounding our own experiences of change and into a place of surrender and peace with whatever metamorphosis we are asked to endure, as we understand that it is not just us who must change and consequently feel the fear and pain associated with evolution, but it is everyone. It is through the understanding of these natural laws we are bound by and the resulting surrender that we can travel more quickly through the process of exhausting all our desires, all of our separating desires, that is. Put another way, by understanding why we have to suffer, our desire to incarnate becomes conscious, thereby leading to a speedier return back to Source. But the acceleration of our awakening is not the only benefit we experience from having an understanding of natural law. The other benefit is the accumulation of less karma and therefore less suffering. While we are still unconscious of the laws of the universe and how they operate, it can take a soul one, two, or even multiple lifetimes to learn one particular lesson needed in order to evolve or move forward through its current desire cycle. This happens when the ego has extreme fear surrounding the changes to itself required by the law of change. This extreme fear being the result of trauma and/or guilt experienced in a certain lifetime that has not yet been worked through. With the knowledge of natural laws, the ego is brought out of darkness, which is the place where fear originates. Once the ego becomes conscious of the unconscious forces at work in its life, it is liberated. It no longer has to keep playing out the same painful experiences and lessons lifetime after lifetime. This in turn leads to significantly less karma and suffering than is otherwise possible. I hope you found something of value in the information I've shared in this video, and I dedicate the content of this video to the liberation of all beings.